Hello, Michael. It's so wonderful to be here with you. Thank you for doing this interview with us.
Yeah, likewise. Great to see you, Scott.
All right, Michael, you are the co-founder, CEO of mParticle, one of the leading CDPs in the world. And so let's just dive right in. Thinking about some of the major shifts that are happening in marketing and Martech right now, particularly around customer data. Ooh, what's happening here with the cloud data warehouse and the rise of that as a data technology that marketers have to work with?
Yeah, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's a positive trend that provides most knowledge workers with access to first-party data, and that's been a really important trend. Having been in the ad tech space before mParticle and now more in the marketing tech space, I've seen really for the past, 20 years or so, companies have tried to do everything that they could to not build a strong first party data foundation, right? From third party cookies to third party data to just buying a whole bunch of tools and trying to throw that at the problem. And it starts with the customer and the artifact that's created as a result of the customer interacting with the digital products and having a strategy around what to actually do with that data, right? And so, look, when we started mParticle back in 2013, long before the CDP acronym even existed, the data warehouse ecosystem was, or the cloud data warehouse ecosystem was in its infancy, right? Now, truth be told, if I had to build mParticle all over again from this point in 2023, or maybe beginning of next year, 2024, I would build on top of the cloud data warehouse. But that being said, there is a ton of legacy data that sits all around the organization, and there is a ton of valuable data that needs to be captured and analyzed and activated in real time, right? So moving things through the data warehouse may make sense for a lot of things, but it's not this like silver bullet or this easy button that fixes all problems. Access is not execution. That's something that we talk about a lot. Yes, it simplifies access, but just because you can access something doesn't mean that you're entitled to subsequent success. The data governance, like all the things that end up undermining marketing success and like great marketing strategies, those need to be accounted for.
Yeah, it's almost like one of the advantages of the cloud data warehouse is, in theory, all this data from across the organization is now in one place that marketers have the ability to tap into, which, to your point earlier about, hey, as we look at first party data, it isn't just the data that marketing campaigns directly would have had access to. It's ideally like first party data across the entire customer journey. So very exciting for marketers to have access to more and more of this data. But to your point, that's the upside of that. The downside of that is, oh my goodness, like all this data is there, and the amount of like governance and organization and structure there, highly variable. And so it feels like that's really where marketers are challenging of how do they actually make that data useful?
Yeah, that's right. And this isn't the first time we've seen this, right? If we rewind the clock back to, I don't know, 2008, 2009 or so, as the cost of storage was really plummeting towards effectively next to nothing. The shift that happened in like the digital advertising ecosystem was very much the same. Prior to that, you had these ad networks that had built out proprietary data networks because access was the problem. And now, or back then, data was abundant and they had to do something with it. And what you needed to be able to do was isolate the effect of data above and beyond whatever inherent performance that you would see across your, say, media campaigns or email campaigns, right? Because if you are going to apply data to target a more specific cohort of users, it should have some sort of uplift effect. And if it doesn't, then the question is like, why bother? Because it's not like it's completely free, right? There's cost of storage, there's cost of compute, all those things. So ultimately, the situation that we're in now, where everybody has a data warehouse, everybody has a ton of data, but they don't necessarily know what to do with it. And just having a segmentation engine based on SQL or a visual segmentation engine, that doesn't get you there. We're at the point now because this data abundance, we need to be able to use machine learning to be able to cut through the noise and ultimately find the patterns that the compute cycles of the human brain are not capable of detecting.
Yeah, and we will definitely get to this conversation here around machine learning and AI, of course, because how could we not? But just following up here on the cloud data warehouse, a couple things that seem interesting about it is one is this is now introducing marketers perhaps to a broader set of stakeholders or other team members deeper in the data IT organization than before. How do you see marketers like adapting to this broader team collaboration?
Yeah, it's a good question. And before it was the data engineer and data scientist, it was the developer who had to instrument the tag more natively. And so this coming together of data providers, the people who write the queries, write the code, implement and instrument whatever tool, they need to come together with the data consumers, all the people in the front office that end up using or needing to use data to do their jobs effectively, especially at scale. So we've long championed this notion of data as a team sport because you can't start to isolate any one single group. I think everybody has valuable input in terms of what is the right infrastructure for their organization. I think maybe where our views have evolved over the past few years is we've long been agnostic in terms of the data source, whether it's web or mobile or connected TV or the voice platforms or video game systems, digital point of sale systems, whatever. We were also agnostic around where we would send data to so as to avoid channel conflict. But I think what we've also seen is that we need to be architecture agnostic as well. So if that means that there's this big data warehouse that sits in the center of their architecture, great. Our job, the way that we've delivered value to the market and to our customers, has never been centered around the data storage and the data management. It's always been about the intelligent movement of data, right? And so if they have a data warehouse, great. If that's the center of their data architecture, great. If it's not, fine.
So one more technical question here on the data warehouse side of things. It's because of the terminology of zero copy architectures has been flying around a lot in the industry this year. What is your perspective on, first of all, what is zero copy architecture and like, where is it valuable? Where is it not?
I think it's a bit of a misnomer, right? Because if you are going to do something with the data does get copied into the application layer, right? So what zero data copy is, to me, it's a giant marketing scheme from the cloud data warehouses to try to own as much of the compute cycles as possible, right? Even with zero data copy, it's not the total cost of ownership across your marketing tech stack decreases, right? You're just shifting, like, where are you paying? Where are you paying more? Where are you paying less? The idea, though, the argument on behalf of it is that you shouldn't replicate your data because that's expensive and it leads to a bunch of issues, right? The problem with that argument is we all know the storage of data is fairly minimal, right? The cost of the data storage is minimal. The real cost is in the compute. Whether you're doing it in a purpose-built tool like mParticle, or whether you're doing it more natively in the data warehouse through a tool like mParticle, it doesn't matter. There's nothing is free.
Makes sense. All right. Well, actually, this is then the perfect segue. Let's talk about some of this compute and actually what we're doing with this data, which of course leads us to AI. And you would think from the headlines that all AI is generative AI and, oh, hey, writing blog posts and creating images. You guys have been working with AI for a really long time. What are the different types of AI that you see marketers actually using in practice today?
I think that there's about 5 different types of AI, right? So you have text-based, ChatGPT. You have visual-based, things like DALL-E, right? You have interactive AI, which is like the intelligent chatbots. So companies like Core.ai and ASAPP. It feels like a human experience, even though it's all code-driven. And then the 2 final ones are the areas where we've been focused. Analytical AI, which is about building predictions from very large, vast data sets. And then functional AI, which takes analytical AI one step further and it creates action through, I don't know, capabilities like next best action, figuring out what channel a single user is most likely to respond to an offer, an ad, a message, and integrating that entirely so that it's all automated.
How have you seen like marketers like on the progress curve here? Like where are we at with that more analytical AI and this more functional AI?
Yeah, I think probably across all the different forms of AI, like we are at different points in the hype cycle. I think for to your point, like the hype around generative AI right now is massive, and like all hype cycles, it will go through the kind of trial of despair, right, and then it'll reemerge. I I think with analytical and functional AI, what I've seen over the course of probably the past decade, maybe 15 years, when people were talking about this more as like big data. Nobody calls it big data anymore. I'm old enough to remember when it was called big data. There was a lot of very simple algorithmic approaches that were pawned off as machine learning and AI. And so I think that a lot of it had a black eye for
Mm.
it, right? It was just overpromised, overhyped, oversold, and it had marginal benefits at best. Now, I think the generational shift has occurred. The infrastructure and the underlying technology, which is required to actually realize the vision and the opportunity around machine learning and AI is there now. Quite frankly, it wasn't there 15 years ago. I think like where we're at is we've got through that like that trough
Mm.
of despair and we're getting back to some level of market normalcy. You do see a ton of different vendors across marketing tech talking about their AI capabilities, but a lot of the times it's just like they built models around propensity scores, so customers who are likely to churn or likely to engage in some meaningful way. But that's not the only type of prediction, right?
Mhm.
There's lookalikes. You may want to build uplift models or regression analyses, right? Like you have to be able to span a much greater breadth of various machine learning pipelines if you really want to have a true claim to being AI driven.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things you're absolutely right. I see the press releases come in flooding on a daily basis, and pretty much, yeah, every tool in the Martech landscape has some form of AI, which again, at some level is nice. It's like a lot of experimentation, a lot of people trying to push the boundaries here. But I imagine it gets quite confusing for most marketers who are now trying to decide, okay, there's a variety of different levels at which this particularly analytical and functional AI can exist. How much of it's at the application layer? How much of it is at the CDP, the decision layer? How much should live in the warehouse? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, and look, I think this question doesn't just pertain to AI. There's lots of feature based overlap amongst the infrastructure layer and then the tools that sit at the application layer. So it's always confusing because we'll oftentimes get asked, you guys do segmentation, but this other email tool does segmentation. Are you guys competitors? And the answer is no. There's a job to be done. And for us, the job is about addressing the needs along either the entire data value chain or a part or parts of that data value chain. I think the argument I would make to have AI reside in the CDP as the kind of decisioning engine is one, we typically have more data in the CDP because we're activating across more use cases. But two, we have better data protections
Mm.
from the standpoint of data quality and data governance to help ensure that there is a baseline level of truth in the data because bad data leads to bad predictions and bad predictions lead to mostly probably bad outcomes, right? Definitely at scale. And so making sure that you're operating off of a really solid foundation. Now, for us, just like a little bit of history, We started in mobile, hence the M in mParticle, but we use that. That was never the end game. We use that as a springboard to solve the multi-channel data challenges, which are the things I mentioned around data quality and governance and connectivity. And similar to mobile, that was never our end game either. That was just the launch pad for insights and automation and intelligence, like the things that we have been championing for the good part of the past couple of years. So I'd say, yeah, the argument to make, data protections lead to better predictions. We typically connect to more channels, right? So it's not just about retention marketing, not just about paid advertising, not just about customer support, not just about loyalty, right? It's about creating that holistic experience. And then, yeah, I think that's the vast majority of it.
Yeah. I think people don't fully appreciate how valuable context is. Again, it goes back to this idea that, yes, there's a whole universe of this data that's flooding into the cloud data warehouse, which as a source is a wonderful thing. But the value in putting context around that, like the governance, what does this mean in a marketing use case? And then how do we apply this analytical and functional AI to decision models there? So speaking of context, how about the context from the customer's perspective? I feel like another one of these topics that's gotten hot again this year, in the customer data world is real time. And what does it mean to be real time, and why would you even need that?
Yeah. We're definitely hitting on the hot topics du jour. Yeah, real time, depending on how you view it, can either be viewed as this like bit of check the box functionality that may map to a certain feature within a broader platform. Or if you're a little bit more dogmatic about it, like we are at mParticle, we feel like it is as important of a generational shift as the move from analog to digital, from on-prem to the cloud. I think the same is true with moving from batch to streaming. When you think about, I think as an industry, people talk about what are business moats? And I think that there's lots of debate. Are there network effects? Yeah, but network effects can go away. The one true moat is how fast an organization can learn and action on the insights that it has from those learnings, right? So speed is a competitive advantage. Speed kills, right? If you move fast, you will run people over. If you move slow, somebody else is going to run you over, right? It's pretty straightforward. And I think that the reason it's so important, like just look at our own behaviors. Like as consumers, we're completely distracted. Multiple screens, notifications. If marketers don't capture the attention of their consumer in the moment that matters, it's like leaving money on the table, right? And batch-based processing, which maybe an hour outdated, a day, or in some cases a week outdated, they've probably missed in most cases, definitely not all, but in most cases, that very valuable window of opportunity. And I think why that matters is what we've seen over the course of the past few years, especially with the signal loss from third-party cookies and the new policies from like Apple mainly. Cheap customer acquisition has gone away.
Yeah.
But then what that means is that you got to keep your customers around. The onus and the center of gravity has grown around customer experience, right? And if you're moving too slow, you're giving the opportunity to your competitor to own that customer experience.
Yeah. No, I think you're right on. It's marketing in the digital experience age very much feels like a game of finding the magic moments. How do you create those like moments where the customer's like, oh, wow, yes, no, that's exactly, I'm so glad you did that. Or at least avoiding the anti-magic moments of, wait, I've got this problem over here and you're hitting me with this other offer there. Like, are you totally nuts? So I definitely buy the use cases for it. I think it's a very powerful way for marketers to even understand how they apply this. Mm-hmm. Just while we're on the topic of it, since I'm a bit of a nerdy guy, what's required from the infrastructure perspective to actually support that kind of real-time capability?
Yeah, when you think about the end-to-end value chain of the different processes that it takes from the point of data collection all the way through like a decision and then ultimately activation, data collection has to be in real time. Identity resolution has to be tightly integrated into the data collection process, so that can be done in real time. You can understand if this is already an existing user or not an existing user. The processing of that data through the system, understanding if that user qualifies to be included or disqualified from a number of pre-existing audience segments or customer journeys that have been created. That has to happen in real time. And then the connections to the downstream tools, those need to disseminate the data in real time. Now, there is, in some cases, bottlenecks on the downstream applications side, like their systems they don't ingest data in real time. So you can move it as fast as possible, and then there's a bit of a bottleneck towards the end of the value chain. But I'd say the vast majority of marketing tech and ad tech vendors do have to deal with real time and these low latency environments that otherwise degrades performance to a point where, the amount that we all charge from a contractual basis to our customers just doesn't pay off.
Yeah. Now, that makes sense. It's just looking at the scale of all the different components you need to get properly connected. You were talking earlier about remembering the days of everyone talking about big data. Oh my goodness, what do we do with all this data? In some ways, it really does feel like we've shifted into an age of almost more big ops. We've got all the data. Now the challenge is all the different pieces that we have to line up to really be able to execute effectively against that.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think that's a good and important evolution, right? It's not just like, how do we get access to it? It's like, how do we make something with it? I'm very much of the opinion that's positive progress. I think the main thing, though, is this usually leads to the bundling, unbundling conversation. Do you want one system to do it all? A couple, maybe few systems to do it all? Or do you want 18 different vendors to try to replicate what you may get in a single integrated offering? And that's the whole kind of packaged versus composable thing. It's a little bit nonsensical, because you should be able to choose between the best of all worlds. Like, you shouldn't have to buy massive monolith software packages anymore. And in most cases, you don't. And at the same time, you should be able to grow and evolve your use cases with a limited number of vendors. Because I think that definitely over the past couple of years, as we move beyond this ZERP era, people they're scrutinizing their software costs. We do a ton, and we feel it a bunch in market as well. And so I think one of the trends that we've seen is that customers definitely want to simplify things. And while there may be a point in time down the road where having infinite flexibility and being able to deconstruct what one solution does and bring 18 different tools and do it yourself, that's cool for the hobbyists and the edge case users. But for the vast majority, they want it to work. They want it to work fast. They want it to have access to all the different integrations that they use. They want integrated insights and intelligence. They want to be able to protect against the things that operationally get in their way. And you don't really get that. You lose that layer of observability when you start trying to mix and match the 12 or 18 different vendors into reconstructing a CDP.
No, I couldn't agree more with taking the balanced approach to this. And it's almost like an Occam's razor for Martech stacks, of the simplest stack possible, but no simpler. Awesome. Michael, I could spend another hour or two picking your brain on these topics.
Same.
Thank you so much for the time. And best wishes on the adventures for 2024.
Likewise. Appreciate it.